Okay, I appreciate you guys showing up tonight. Greg's going to talk about Arp Galaxies, and I guess he can just take it away.
All right.
Yep, we have your screen.
Okay. Let me see if I can make it full screen. There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, so what Dan and I thought we'd share with you this evening is introduction to the ARP catalog. And you might be asking yourself, well, why would I be interested in the ARP catalog? And I think, after you've imaged M42 a couple dozen times and M31 7 or 8 times and all of the other bright galaxies and nebula, you might be searching around for something a little bit different to image. And so the ARP catalog kind of fits right into that category. And I like to make the comparison of the ARP catalog to the Messier catalog. Both of those were produced for different reasons than we use them today, but both of them have turned out to be a treasure trove for anybody who's interested in imaging, particularly us amateurs. And in fact, even the professionals still refer to the Messier objects by their M number, and they still refer to many of the galaxies that are contained in ARP's catalog by their ARP number. So hopefully by sharing a little bit with you about the catalog and a few of the images in it, not too many, but enough maybe to whet your appetite, hopefully will encourage you to explore it on your own. And there's a lot there to explore. So Halton Chip Arp, as he was known to his friends, born in 1927, lived to be 86, and he passed away in 2013. After serving in the Navy in World War II, he went to Harvard and got a Bachelor of Science in Astronomy, graduated in 1949 after getting done in 3 years. He then got admitted to Caltech, which was at that time the premier institution for the study of astronomy. You can probably recall that Hubble and some of his colleagues were involved at Caltech. And so Halton Arp became a PhD student there and graduated with his PhD in 1953. Following that, he did observational work. He was pretty much an observational astronomer, and he did that work at Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar over the next 29 years or so. And it's important to keep in mind what was going on in the 50s and early 60s. This was kind of the golden age of cosmology and astronomy, because Hubble had published his book on the realm of the nebula previously, and the 200-inch telescope had come online in the early 50s. And so there was a lot going on for a guy with Halton Arp's background and interest in science. And so one of the things that he decided to do was to put together an atlas of unusual galaxies. And I'll explain, a little bit about that as we go along. He called this the Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies. And it was pretty much a single person project done by him. It got published in 1966, I think, after he worked on it for about 10 years. And it included 338 what they called nearby galaxies. Most of these were photographed with either the Hale 200-inch telescope or with the Schmidt camera, the Ocean 48 from Mount Palomar. And he divided the galaxies into various different groups: spirals, ellipticals, just general galaxies, double galaxies, and then there were a few oddballs at the end that he just threw into a group that he called miscellaneous. And most of these images were images that were suggested to him by his colleagues. And again, if you go back and read through the history of astronomy at that time, these are people like Walter Bade and Alan Sandage and some of the other great astronomers that we kind of associate with cosmology today. The bullet point number 4 here is kind of the important one. The purpose that he had behind the image catalog that he put together was so that people who are coming up with these different theories of galaxy evolution, now that Hubble had proved that these nebula that were visible in the sky were really galaxies separate from the Milky Way, there were lots of theorists coming up with different theories of galaxy evolution. And Halt and Arp felt, well, if I've got a catalog of different looking galaxies, that'll be a great thing for people to use when they go to try to have an image to describe their theories. So that was kind of his underlying purpose. He also wanted to use it as a reference for studies of what were called at that time quasi-stellar objects. And actually in the late 50s and early 60s was when the first quasi-stellar radio objects were being described, the things that we now refer to as quasars. And the quasars really kind of threw everybody for a loop, including Halt and Arp, and caused a great deal of controversies. And so now this same catalog that we as amateurs sometimes use is recognized as this collection of interacting or merging galaxies. And it's interesting that Arp believed a little bit the opposite. He felt that a lot of the images of these peculiar galaxies showed galaxies separating apart, and some galaxies being born from larger galaxies, rather than the popular theory today where we see galaxies merging or showing effects of having merged. Arp got involved in a series of controversies that took about 40 years to resolve. And again, as I said, in the 50s and early 60s, when the first quasars were identified, and one of the things that was obvious right away, or what appeared to be obvious, was the extreme redshift of these objects, which were extremely bright. For a long time, it wasn't clear why their spectra didn't match up with any of the known stars, until one astronomer decided, you know, they really do match up. They're just all shifted way to the right. And once they figured that out, that's matched up pretty well with what Hubble had published about the expansion of the universe. And so most astronomers decided that these quasars were very distant, very bright objects. And I say most because Arp wasn't one of them. What he noted was that there seemed to be a lot of quasars around these peculiar galaxies, particularly the ones from number 100 through 150. And other astronomers kind of confirmed what he presumed to be happening, that these quasars must be associated with these unusual galaxy formations, even though the redshift suggested that they weren't, that they were just in the line of sight, but much more distant. And so despite this large difference in redshifts, he postulated that the quasars that were near these peculiar galaxies were there because of some intrinsic property that caused their redshifts to look like they were far away, but they really weren't. And so that became a big controversy that ARP and a few other folks decided to place their professional reputations on, even though most astronomers at the time rejected it. And we now know that that was wrong. But as I said, it took quite a few years and a lot of debate and a lot of further examination of quasars before the tide was turned and ARP became the outlier. And his theories took quite a long time before they were actually completely thrown out by most professional astronomers. And I should note that he didn't believe in the Big Bang either. He was one of those early cosmologists that felt that the universe could be explained by a steady state of constant expansion. So we wanted to share with you a few ARPs, but I was going to show you just a couple that you probably have seen or even photographed already. This particular one, ARP 85, you should recognize that, pretty familiar one. Here's another very familiar one, ARP 152. I won't tell you what it actually is. Hopefully you recognize it from that obvious jet of material. And finally, ARP 168, which is a companion to M31, which probably most of you have at one time or another imaged when you were shooting the mother galaxy there. So those are some of the familiar ones. Now we're going to share with you some of the lesser known ones. And Dan, if you want to describe yours, the first 6 are yours, I'll just kind of go through them, and you and I can describe. You can describe them, or I can describe them.
Okay.
And I should mention that the inserts that you see in black and white are from ARP's original catalog, and I've just arranged them so that they match up with the image that either Dan or I made.
Yeah, this is ARP 217. He called this one put this one in as adjacent loops class. It's actually a few degrees north of M97 in Ursa Major, so it's one that's in a pretty good position a lot of the time to take pictures of.
And I should point out also that there's a jet that you can see right here in Dan's photograph, and it's also visible in the image from the 200-inch telescope, probably even better in Dan's image. But again, that jet was one of the peculiarities, along with this outer band of nebulosity that drew ARP's attention to this particular galaxy.
This is one of my favorite ones. This was actually one of the first ones I imaged when I first put a camera on a telescope back in 2010 or 11. I was surprised when I took my first picture of it, and my picture from my driveway looked similar to the one he took with the 200-inch telescope. This one's in his connected arms class, and this one's a few degrees north of M94 and Canes Venatici. I believe I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. But these are the kind of galaxies I like. This is the name escapes me, the kind of Magellanic, I believe, type galaxy.
And one of ARP's notes was that there is a faint tail to the east, and you can see it on the original image here. And it's also plainly visible in Dan's image here as well. So I think it's interesting that you can see a lot of detail in images made with modest equipment that rival what Halton Arp was able to get with his glass plates.
Here's another little pair that's interesting. This is ARP 271. And this one's one of many galaxy pairs in Virgo. But this is, I don't know, I found it very interesting the way they're connected like this. And I believe this was one that was definitely based on the distances I found. I believe it was definitely in the process of merging or something catastrophic. So it's not just in our field of view that it looks close.
Yeah, a lot of the galaxies that are included really are either merging or have merged or are at least disrupting each other. You'll notice that almost all of these are also included in the NGC catalog. So if you're trying to find these things with your planetarium program and you don't have an ARP catalog in there, you can pretty much go directly to the NGC catalog and find them. ARP's notes note that there's this bifurcated arm that seems to be, not only is there one arm connecting these two galaxies, but there appear to be two of them. So he made a special note of that.
This one's a really strange one. This one's actually in, I believe it's in Aquarius. It's right just below Pisces, though. But it's got a long filament arm, and I just found it interesting.
Yeah, this was in his grouping of double galaxies with long filaments, and you'd be surprised. There's quite a few galaxies that fit into this description. This is probably the one with the longest arms, don't you think, Dan?
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
And these are very faint galaxies, and you can see there it's in the MGC catalog, not in the NGC catalog. But even with modest sized scopes like Dan or the one I use, you're able to get quite a bit of detail, similar to what the professional astronomers were acquiring back in the late 50s.
This is another interesting one, and I found this one interesting because I don't think ARP, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think ARP's image shows the tail at the top going north. But there's actually, this is an ARP twofer, and what I'd call a twofer. There's 299 and 296 in it, and I found this one really interesting. This one's also in Ursa Major below M97. And this is actually one I took pictures of twice. So there's a lot of data here because I didn't realize that I had taken it a second time.
And the image over here on the right is actually from the textbook by Jeff Kniep and Dennis Webb. And I'll give you a reference to that at the end. But this is the way that their textbook is set up. It gives you a inverted view similar to what's in ARP's original catalog, but they also identify all of the interesting features that ARP included in his notes, such as this faint southern tail along with the faint northern tail and the tail connecting the two galaxies here in ARP 296. So you actually have two ARPs, this one and this one in the same field as Dan already mentioned. This is another one of those double galaxies with long filaments.
This one's an interesting field. Some of the galaxies in it, three of them are considered the ARP. There's a bunch of, I think he called it groups of galaxies, but there's, one of them's almost like a sigma sign, and the other one's next to it is kind of strange. And then the other one, I think it looks like a elliptical, but I'm not sure that it is. I don't quite remember. But these, along with the fourth one, are also part of the Hickson compact group 44. So this image, if you do Astro League programs, there's a bunch of things in this image. And this one's just above the bright star Algeba, I believe it's called, in Leo. So it's pretty well placed too for catching images of it from around here, especially as we head towards spring and summer.
All right, I'm going to share a few of my images with you. This is one of my favorites. This is ARP 77 or NGC 1097. And this is classified by Halton Arp as spiral with small, high surface brightness companion on arm. There are quite a few that fall in that category as well. The small, high surface brightness companion is this one that you see kind of shining through the northern arm of the spiral galaxy here. Interestingly, if you invert this and stretch it a lot, there's actually 4 jets that are emanating from this disrupted galaxy. I was able to see 2 of them when I stretched my image. You can see one of them here comes up and then makes a dog leg, and there's another faint one here. The other 2 are down here and weren't easily visible, even though I stretched the hell out of it. But it turns out that these jets are not the types of jets that are usually associated with these disrupted galaxies, where it's usually a jet of plasma. These jets are actually stars that have been ripped out of the galaxy, possibly by the interaction of these 2. And so there's 2 jets on this side and 2 jets on the other side. And ARP had to go back and re-image this in order to actually find those. But I was amazed that by stretching the heck out of it, they actually did show up. ARP 99 is also a galaxy group. ARP called it the spirals with elliptical companion on the arm. This is the 7550 group, also cataloged as Hickson 93. The elliptical is 7550 here, the namesake of the group, and the one next to it is 7547. Up at the top up here, the oddly shaped one is 7549. But the interesting thing here is the material that seems to be connecting these 2, showing that there's some sort of interaction between them. And again, you can see that as well on ARP's original image. This is a group that's in the constellation Pegasus. Another one of the interesting ones, this one didn't get the long filament designation, but it got elliptical connected to spiral. And again, there are quite a few of these. NGC 5216 is the one here at the bottom. That's the elliptical. And the spiral is 5218 up here at the top. And there's a pretty obvious tail of gas connecting the 2, as well as a smaller tail down here at the bottom. You can also see a faint northern tail, which is probably evidence of the disruption when these 2 galaxies, came close enough to each other to disrupt each other. Again, these are visible most of the year in the constellation of Draco. You probably recognize this as the far left version of Markarian's chain in Virgo. And these 2 in particular were sometimes referred to as Copeland's eyes after they picked up that designation from one of the editors of Sky and Telescope back in the late 40s or early 50s, I think. But again, ARP chose to include them because, again, he saw it as an elliptical close to and disturbing a spiral. In this case, the elliptical is the galaxy here, and the spiral is here. And in ARP's terminology, he used the term absorption. So when he saw white in the inverted images here, to him, that meant that there was something absorbing light coming from the object. When we view that in normal full color, those appear as dark dust lanes. So you'll see in Arp's notes many times the term absorption used, and that's what he used to refer to dark dust lanes that occurred in these peculiar galaxies. One of the far south ones is in Centaurus. That's ARP 153, otherwise known as NGC 5128. Again, ARP used the terminology disturbed with interior absorption. And again, on his inverted view, the white indicates something blocking light from coming through. And of course, that appears as these dark dust lanes that we associate with that particular galaxy. This is pretty far south, but at certain times of the year, it's high enough above the horizon that you can see it and actually capture it by imaging. ARP 175 is one of the ones that I found really interesting. ARP used the term narrow countertails to describe this, but this, if you look closely, either at the original image or at my image from a couple years back, you can see that there are actually 3 galaxies that are being connected by a trail of gas. These two obviously here, and then there's this tail that comes down here and appears to connect to the lower southern galaxy here at the bottom. And so this is a little unusual. There are lots of examples of 2 galaxies connected by a tail of gas where there was interaction, but this one actually looks to be evidence that all 3 of these galaxies had some sort of interchange of material. The last image that I'm going to share is ARP 189 in Coma Berenices. And this one's sometimes called the guitar galaxy, I think. But to me, it looks like a helicopter. You can see in the original image, there's a dark central portion, but then there's a tail that goes to the east, and then there's a counter tail faintly visible at the end. It seems to be much more prominent in a color image here. And if I inverted the image and stretched it, you can see that, in fact, there is a counter tail here, which appears to be evidence of a interaction with some other galaxy, which is no longer in the field of view here. Again, in a lot of these images, Arp went back and he looked at the radio galaxy catalogs that were produced in the late 50s and early 60s and found a lot of these radio sources, which were later confirmed as quasars, around the galaxies. And that's what led him to come up with his theory that those quasars must have originated from these peculiar or disrupted galaxies. These are the references that you'll find very useful. The most useful one is this book by Jeff Kennett and Dennis Webb. Was originally published, I think, back in 2004 or 2006 by Wilman Bell, who went out of business, but then the American Association of American Astronomical Society picked it up, and it's now available for a few dollars more than when it was originally published, for $40. And it's one of the best books that I have in my library, because the first part of it describes what was going on during Arp's time. And then it's got these great introductions for how to find these galaxies and what to look for once you do find them. There is a Halton Arp website that kind of describes his life work. There are a couple of ways to get at the original paper. The first one here goes to the original paper, and the second one is one that Dan shared with me that is a kind of a PDF that allows you to walk through the paper, but they both have all of the original images. The Wikipedia page is really good too. It has all of the images as well as some comparison images from various different astronomers. And it explains why particular peculiar galaxies ended up being included. And the links at the bottom here, Dan has hundreds of images, and I have about 50 or 60 of my own. So you can feel free to peruse those as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, real quick before we do some questions, I just wanted to add that I always talk about the Astronomy League programs, and there is a Northern Art program and a Southern Art program, which includes some more galaxies by a different astronomer. And so if you're interested in imaging these for programs, the Northern one, I think it requires 100 images.
Yeah.
And that was actually, I think, the first one I ever did. But there's a lot of good stuff on it. And if you've been taking pictures for other things, you'll find a lot of the more common ARPs are Messier objects or Herschel objects and things like that. So you've already got a good start on it. The Southern one is more challenging, and the galaxies are less interesting. It's kind of like imaging the Herschel 2 or 3 or something. They're a lot more challenging, and they're all very low. But I
Hey, Dan, are the southern ARPs visible from northern hemisphere locations, or do you have to use a remote telescope in the south?
They are. I actually imaged all of them from here and in New Mexico with a refractor. So you can image enough of them to earn the certificate from the Northern Hemisphere.
And the person who's the coordinator is Marie Lott, and she's a very nice person. She will work with you.
Okay, any questions for Greg or bye?
So Greg, I really got a lot out of that. And I just wanted to say it was really helpful to see the original plates beside more modern day image. And just a comment, really, it just struck me that, you know, going after those dust lanes and all the faint interconnections between the galaxies is a great argument for overexposing plates and overexposing, or really stretching out your image. You're not going to seems like you're not going to see those connections between these galaxies unless you blow out the core of the galaxy. So you don't get that detail, but you get the important thing, which is that those galaxies are really connected.
Yeah, actually, they're fairly easy to image. I mean, I don't do anything terribly special other than try to get 5 or 6 hours of worth of data, so that when I do reduce it, I've got something to work with. A lot of people are put off by the fact that these aren't big, bright galaxies. Most of them are small, on the order of, or I shouldn't say most of them, but a lot of them are on the order of 3 to 6 arc minutes across. And if you're shooting with a small refractor, they appear small. But with the modern software, you can blow things up 2 or 3 times and have a fairly good image, particularly with the new CMOS cameras with small pixels. There's a lot of manipulation you can do. And so I think that's why I encourage people to try to shoot them, because as you saw from Dan's images and from some of mine, you can capture a lot of really interesting detail. And to my way of thinking, a lot of times these are more interesting than some of the Messier galaxies.
So one other thing I noticed that by coincidence, I guess, the astronomy picture of the day today is interacting galaxies with some other designation. It wasn't ARP anything. It was AM some number that I've never heard of. So I guess that's another catalog, or I'm not sure what that listing is for.
I think that's
interacting.
Like Amador or something. That's a Southern Hemisphere type catalog. There's a lot of them. The Southern list a lot of them are AM numbers. I didn't really look up to see who that was or what it was, but that's
Yeah,
something to.
as I was looking over my notes before we started, it was funny because on the evening news, there was a little blurb at the end where it's saying astronomers have discovered the brightest quasar ever observed. And then they listed, you know, how much brighter it was than any other ones and how much further away. And I had a kind of laugh thinking if Halton Arp was still around, he'd be having a good laugh at that too, because that was kind of the whole issue that, you know, he spent his career on, was why are these bright things next to these peculiar galaxies? That was in the news just this evening.
Hey, Greg and Dan, this is Miguel. I appreciate this this session, this meeting. I've always been kind of interested in it. ARPS, and I think Dan, I see a lot of his and see a lot of yours. Do you need dark skies to take advantage of the dark skies to really get the best imaging out of the ARP catalog? Or the images, the northern images?
The dark skies certainly help. As I said, these are pretty small and some of them are very faint. And particularly if you're going for the, you know, the faint details, like on some of the images that we've shown you this evening. So
Okay.
yeah, like any other galaxy imaging, it helps to have dark skies with good contrast to bring out the faint stuff.
Okay. And do you use any kind of filters or just straight luminance or RGB or
All of mine are LRGBs.
LRGBs? Okay.
Yeah, some of them do have an HA component, but for the most part, it's just straight broadband type stuff.
Okay.
But just to tell you, my telescope's like at 2400 millimeters, and Greg's, yours is at what, 1000?
900.
Yeah, or so. So that shows you what we're shooting with. A lot of Greg's images that he posts are very similar to mine.
Yeah.
And so these would be really good. I mean, I think you have an SCT is in your arsenal, and it's probably longer or close to what my telescope is. And so you would get similar type images.
Okay. And on the Chronicle and Observer's Guide, which ARP was that? And I'm assuming it's something that maybe the James Webb or the Hubble telescope took a picture of.
Yeah, the picture on the book is one of the I forget what the name of the which ARP that is, but that wasn't a picture made by ARP. That was a picture produced specifically for the cover of the book. But it is an ARP. I don't remember which one off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the two galaxies that are, I think, in Corvus. I forget what number that is, but yeah, they're in, I believe it's Corvus, and
ARP 22.
I
want
have
to
the
say
book
it's
here in
like
front of me, but I don't see it.
NGC 4039 or something like that.
NGC 4027.
Something like that. Yep. How do I do that? NGC
Yeah.
4038 and 4039.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Before I really started with getting into astrophotography, I watched I want to say it was something either PBS or it was some maybe National Geographic, I can't remember, about Mr. Arp, and I was like, man, this is kind of fascinating, you know, and it was done like recently, like was it the 50s and the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, when he started doing this.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, it was a very interesting story. If I find it, if it was a PBS and if they set up a shareable link, I'll pop it in the group or send it to Dan. Dan can share it out. It was like maybe like an hour-long special, but it was really interesting talking about his childhood and what really got him into it. It was a really, really cool story.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing that or seeing that.
Yeah, I imaged that group from Danville with my refractor. It's a good refractor type image because they're fairly large.
Yeah, and as I noted there at the beginning, a lot of the ARPs are ones you've probably already done, like M51 and M32 and M101, and there's quite a few of the Messier galaxies that fall under the ARP catalog.
And I'd second what Greg said about that book is really good. It's probably the best book I own, and it's a wealth of information, and I have yet you can find so much stuff on the internet, but I haven't found anything that kind of matches that book. It's just really good if you have an interest. I mean, there's over 300 of these things, so there's a lot of good information in that book. It's well worth the cost. I'm not sure if there is actually a PDF version of it or not, but the book is hardbound, it's large, it's kind of the kind of thing you'd find in a library.
Okay, nice.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, Greg. I'm gonna stop the recording real quick. Let's see here.